She was already teaching China painting in New York City even then. And in the lower left photograph, you see her in the center with some of her faculty at Four Winds Summer School. That was in Syracuse. It was in her home. And to her left, our right, that very sweet-faced lady that's sitting next to her is Catherine Cherry, who was a China painter from St. Louis and contributed many designs. We're going to see her work later on today, so I just thought I'd point out her picture. The interesting thing about this photograph is the man in the shadows standing in the back is her long-suffering husband, who kept her going. He was the one that fired her kilns. She was busy painting and carving and making pots and chasing after their children, and he would fire the kilns for her. Mary Chase Perry's early years as a China painter and representative for Horace Calkin's Revelation kiln provide another example. Already known for her articles and prize-winning displays of hand-painted china, Perry toured the country demonstrating Calkin's kiln during the early 1890s. Calkins was the Perry family's next-door neighbor, and he was in the dental supply business. He invented this kiln originally for firing dentures, for making dentures, and when Mary saw it, she thought, oh, I could fire my china in there. It's the same sort of material. And she did, and he was just so taken by that she could make art in these kilns that he had invented for a very practical purpose, which was dentures. And then they hooked up as business associates, and she demonstrated the kilns. You can see an early advertisement on the left for the Calkins kiln, and there she is inspecting some china in those. There were at least 2 different sizes. In Cincinnati, as in other cities, she recorded this little story about how she operated. And I'm quoting, "The kiln was set up in the studio of one of her friends, and she in turn invited everyone she knew to bring pieces of their own work to be fired and to watch the operation of the kiln. In addition, Perry often taught classes in decorating, sold designs for copying, and decorated quite a lot of china for sale. She described her work at this time as being, quote, completely advantageous financially." Eventually, she founded the long-lived Pewabic Pottery with Horace Calkins, and their work in tiles and decorative vases has long been appreciated. That's the Pewabic Pottery, an old photograph of it, but it still looks much like that today. And there is Mrs. Stratton in her Pewabic studio. On the left is a vase that she created in 1929. And on the right, some of the tile work. This particular one is from a fountain at Cranbrook. And Freer, Charles Lang Freer, was a big promoter of her work. He loved her iridescent glazes. He bought quite a lot of it, which you can see in the Freer Gallery in Washington today. He liked to display it with his Whistler paintings. Manuals published in America and England, magazines devoted exclusively to the art, and regular columns in popular art magazines provided instruction, news, and critical reviews of group and individual exhibitions. In addition, individual and group classes also helped women learn the intricacies of applying mineral colors to ceramics and fixing them by fire. On the right is a monthly magazine that preceded Ceramic Studio called The China Decorator. It was published here in New York City by Mrs. O.L. Brownmuller. And Robino started the Ceramic Studio because she thought she could do a better job. And I think Ceramic Studio does have a lot more illustrations in it than Mrs. Brownmuller ever got together for her magazine. On the left is one of many many China painting manuals. Adelaide Osgood, again, an art instructor in New York City, had a very popular Osgood School of Art. She taught a lot of China painting. She wrote this manual. And you can see this is the 11th edition in 1891, so these sorts of books were extremely popular. Ben Pittman's China painting class, taught by Marie Eggers. Oops, did I go too far?
We'll go back one.
Yeah. Can I go? Oh, no, I didn't. I've cued myself. That's where I want to be. Ben Pittman's China painting class, taught by Marie Eggers at the School of Design in Cincinnati, beginning in 1873, is the earliest known of these classes that is described in any detail, although there must have been others even then, organized initially, like the Cincinnati class, around the task of decorating Washington Tea Party cups and saucers to raise money for the Women's Pavilion at the Philadelphia Centennial Exhibition of 1876. And this is one of the teacups and saucers that was made by that fateful class in Cincinnati. Mary Louise McLaughlin, Mariah Longworth Nichols, all the great names of women China painters of Cincinnati were in that class and went on to paint lots of china and also later on paint rookwood pottery. The cup and saucer were painted for one of these parties, and this one, which is in the Cincinnati Art Museum, was actually painted by Mary Louise McLaughlin. During her career, McLaughlin was a member of that fateful Pittman class in Cincinnati, also decorated furniture and pottery, made porcelain in a backyard kiln, and wrote several books on European history. Not to mention her very popular book called China Painting, which went through 4 editions. This is the cover on the 1889 edition. And I showed just a few of her Losanti porcelains, which she made in her backyard kiln until her neighbors complained about the smoke. If you're interested in McLaughlin, and she's a wonderful character to read about, very inspiring biography, I would suggest Anita Ellis's fairly recent book on her. A restless, creative sort. Well, from writing books on European history to making porcelain in her backyard kiln, I'd say there's a lot of restlessness in there. Instruction for many women, however, came through classes held in the studios of professional China painters. The lessons attended by Mary Chase Perry in Detroit likely were typical of the instruction being offered by the mid-1880s outside of academies. And this, here I'm quoting Perry herself. I took lessons from a celebrated china decorator. Lessons, meaning the privilege of watching him twist his fluent brush into 2 roses with accessory leaves on a china plate, a tracery of gold added to the edge, and the plate fired in his kiln. I was allowed to burnish the gold with a brush of spun glass, and the plate was then presented to me for a consideration. This system of teaching by observation was customary throughout the country, and I was drawn into it. The plate here is by Franz Aulich, who was a European China painter practicing in Chicago and taught many of the Chicago area China painters to paint roses like he learned in Europe. It was in a class like the one Perry describes, taught in Richmond, Indiana, that Caroline Scott Harrison, that would be Mrs. Benjamin Harrison to you, was already an accomplished watercolorist, and this is how she met Paul Putsky through a China painting class in Richmond, Indiana. And she learned to transfer her painting skills to China.